Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jon Saunders, and I'm the Chief Business Development Officer at SECOM. SECOM is a wholly owned subsidiary of Southeast Colorado Power in the southeastern corner of the state. And today we're going to be talking about 5G, sorting out fact from fiction. And today with us, we have Alan DiCicco, he's with Calix, and Kent Blackwell with Delta Montrose Electric and Elevate. So with that, would you guys go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourselves?
All right, thanks, John, and thank you to our audience for joining us today, for having us with you. My name is Alan DiCicco. I am from Calix, and I am in the solutions marketing team responsible for 5G and some other emerging technologies that will have an impact on broadband networks.
I'm Kent Blackwell with Delta Montrose Electric Association and Elevate. Here is the Chief Technology Officer for the company and leading our fiber to the premise deployment, as well as our smart grid efforts and intelligence for our electric grid. So.
All right, well, thank you guys. And so today what we'd like to do, we'd like to introduce the idea of 5G, what it is, and maybe what's real, what's hype, and what's fact and fiction here. So Alan, would you mind starting it out here and just tell us a little bit about 5G and what it is?
All right, thanks, John. Certainly we'll do that. And 5G is a bit of a catchphrase being used by the media companies, just about everybody, and so that it's come to mean whatever the speaker wants it to be. But if you trace it back to its roots, the G stands for fifth generation. So this is the fifth generation in the evolution of mobile service. And if you'll indulge me, I will step back in history a little bit here for a second. And many of you here, and I know that's true of the three speakers here, we all remember when, the first generation of mobile service was these large bat phones, the big brick phones that we could carry around, and they were analog voice. That was their entire purpose, about 2 kilobits per second of voice service that we thought was a miracle. We all moved to 2G service at some point. Now this was a digital service for voice, and also did short messaging service, about 64 kilobits per second. We thought that was wonderful. 3G came along about the time that I got my first iPhone, was a 3G iPhone. So now we could do voice, short messaging, and email. And maybe you could surf the web a little bit. But that surfing the web and really an internet experience came with 4G, or now LTE. And we all carry our smartphones with us all the time. I've got mine within arm's reach here. And we can do so much on our smartphones that it's really become, an app world of what we do, rather than so much, obviously, voice or text messaging. With 5G, we are moving up in speed once again. So 1 gigabit maybe with LTE is now going to peak at 10, or some people say 20 gigabits per second. But 5G is fundamentally different. It's not about speed anymore. Some of the applications and services of 5G are about other dimensions, new applications that we can use this cellular service for. So maybe that's something we can talk about as a team, about some of the applications we might see in the future.
Okay, we most definitely can do that. So we've talked about what 5G is, and we're going to talk about what 5G can do. Just for starters here at the beginning, let's just qualify what 5G isn't. Kent, would you mind taking that one and maybe give us an update on that?
Yeah, sure. One of the quick, G's that, the 5Gs that we as consumers have seen, is largely that Wi-Fi nomenclature, that 5 gigahertz. And 5 gigahertz is obviously a far cry from the, the 5G of cellular, and nowhere related in any way, shape, or form. But equally, there's some misconceptions that 5G is only the millimeter wave elements to the cellular introduction, and then furthermore, there's some speak that 5G is going to be this this fixed wireless application that largely resembles what we know of our wireless ISPs in the industry and such. And 5G's really none of those. And, as much as it may enhance some of them and really add to what some of those solutions can be, but by, just simple definition, 5G is that fifth generation and the evolution of the whole product platform for cellular as we know it.
Okay, so what you're saying then, so like if I look at my phone and I see like I'm connecting at 5G and the Wi-Fi, that's something different than what 5G technology is.
Sure is. That G stands for gigahertz.
Okay.
That is nothing more than the spectrum band that you're connecting to in our home Wi-Fi. We've got, everybody's probably familiar with that 2.4 gigahertz or 5 gigahertz on our home, Wi-Fi systems. The G in 5G stands for generation. It's the fifth generation.
Okay.
And there is the root of the confusion.
Okay, great. Thank you, Alan, Kent. So let's move on. We were talking about what it's going to be able to do. So it sounds like there's some really exciting things that 5G technology is going to support and bring forth here in the future. Kent, would you mind telling me some of the things that you see?
Well, there's throughout the marketing splash of 5G. We've all heard of the big whiz bang features that are coming, such as autonomous vehicles and bigger bandwidth, lower latency. And, there's a lot of cell phone advertising these days, just really promising, now the 5G nationwide. And yet, we as end consumers, don't really see, all of the change and all of the new enhanced opportunities. There's promises of, surgical precision and industrialization, using, certain mechanics and robotics to leverage this technology. And, as much as there's hype and promise and a future, map for this product platform in cellular, it's a lot of perspective right now. I think truly the beauty of this product is in the eye of the beholder and all the things that it can be. And with the increased bandwidth, the increased or decreased latency, if you will, and just larger pipe in getting bandwidth and technology, connections made, it really opens the door to many facets and many, ideological opportunities to kind of expand and do things better, faster, and wiser.
Okay, so it sounds like you're saying really the sky's the limit with some of the applications that are being developed and probably will be developed over the course of time as this product develops and evolves. And speaking of that, what's a timeline for 5G to be out, let's say, in the NFL cities, and then let's talk about rural Colorado, like up in the mountains or out in the southeast plains. What's it look like for timelines on that? Alan, would you take a stab at that?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that and bridge that into another conversation I wanted to have. 5G is not a point in time. It's not even 2 or 3 points in time. The networks will be rolling out 5G for a decade or 2 decades. In parts of the world, we're still deploying LTE networks. 4G, while here in the US, the 3 or maybe 4 large mobile operators are now talking about rolling out their 5G network. And what you're going to see is a technology upgrade really quickly, right? So AT&T and T-Mobile and Verizon can quickly upgrade their radios on the towers, and bing, overnight, our smartphones will say 5G in the corner. And so there will be some 5G rollout in the NFL cities and even across rural America, because we've upgraded the radios at the top of those 300-foot towers. And that's going to give everybody a sense of technology advancing, of 5G rolling out. And that's part of what the FCC has mandated, that these mobile operators do is that they push 5G out into the networks. And that we can think of that as the phase one of 5G rollout. It's quick, get it out, marketing driven. Every single day it seems like there are dueling announcements about whose 5G has a greater nationwide coverage. The other part of 5G will be the new spectrums that are rolled out. And this is where that millimeter wave or small cells will get deployed over a longer period of time. And that's the challenge that you mentioned in your question. When will millimeter wave and 10 gigabits per second over 5G, it's great that it's in Chicago or Denver. When will that start to roll out into small cities of rural America, the Front Range? And that, in my perspective, will be a decade in coming. The higher the bandwidth, the smaller the radios, the longer the footprint in time.
Yeah, it's probably, sorry to interrupt, but
yeah,
it's probably meaningful to kind of talk about the architecture and kind of how will this evolution happen, and how does it transform from, just what we know as cellular today and transform into, this big bandwidth, the gigabit level of throughput that they're promising. And, that truly happens with the introduction of, smaller, focused cells. So going from a macro cell world, and where you have the big towers that we've all seen dotted across the landscape for the last 30 plus years, but equally, you begin to, support those with, micro cells and small cells or pico cells, and just driving the concentered focus of those signals smaller and smaller. And the only way you can do that and do it effectively and still backhaul that data is with, fiber optic connectivity between all these devices. And John, I'm sure you've seen, out in your world, rural parts of Colorado, just the same as us, the likelihood that some of this is going to reach that small scale isn't as likely for us as it might be in, say, Denver. But, I'm sure you kind of can speak to some of those same details that I'm pointing towards.
Exactly. So some of the smaller communities, or when you get out in a very rural area where there's not a lot of people out there, you literally can drive miles between houses. Yeah, my guess is that it's going to be a long time before those areas, if ever, have the very high speed small cell capability. Would one of you, it's like Alan, there are some differences between a macro cell, a micro cell, and a small cell. Could you just describe, in a nutshell, give me like a quick introduction, what the difference between those are?
Sure. Put up some visuals for you here, because it's easy to get lost in some of these words. And the macro cell, and Kent did a great job of talking about the evolution of what we see as we drive down the freeways, macro cells and 300-foot towers. And we're very comfortable with seeing those. They look like, this collection of radios at the top. There might be 20 of them. You move down to micro cells, you're now mounted on rooftops of buildings, more urban and suburban areas. They might be the controller for 3 or 4 different small radios, and then all the way down into small cells or pico cells, and different names you have for things that, the location that service providers really are like to get to are streetlight poles, because they generally have conduit running between them and they have electricity to them already. So the idea of putting these small cells on the top of streetlights are really an opportunity and a good way to visualize, if you've got a small cell every 300 meters, 500 meters, just even covering a reasonably sized, suburban living area, subdivisions will take a lot of small cells. And that's investment that'll be quite some time in coming.
Okay. So with those small cells, their coverage radius is significantly smaller than the cells that we're used to seeing with those big macro sites, the tall towers out there. Is that what I'm hearing?
Oh, yes, for sure.
Okay.
The small cells, 200 meters, 300 meters, a macro site might go 5 kilometers. So I've heard estimates of 100 to 300 small cells within the footprint of one macro cell.
Okay.
I think it's probably meaningful to kind of tag in at this point that the different frequencies, the frequency that we've known cellular to use up to this point is it's great at traveling distances, 5 to 10 kilometers isn't, out of the ordinary with current frequency technology. But as you begin to introduce some of that the millimeter wave, frequencies, your propagation of those frequencies is limited to, 600 meters at the most. And, even then it's not penetrating brick walls. It's not penetrating even glass, as much as it delivers the promise of the big bandwidth that 5G brings about, equally, it has severe limitations in what it can do in distance and penetration of obstacles. So, as much as it is kind of the whiz bang that truly brings about the big bandwidth, it is equally as crippled with technological deficiencies and being able to travel far or through things.
So to rephrase what I think I'm hearing here, Kent, if I've got my cell phone and I'm connected up at 1 gig on this millimeter wave standing outside because there's a street light with a small cell out there, as soon as I walk in my house, I lose that connectivity at that really high speed then, is that correct?
Yep, you're looking at some sort of a transition, whether you have, you're walking into an office building that may be equipped with a distributed antenna system, a DAS system of some sort that's, able to bridge that connection, or whether you're walking into your own personal home to where only the traditional, 1.2 gigahertz, 2.4 gigahertz kind of frequency ranges that can penetrate that building. The devices as we understand them will be able to auto sense and down convert to those slower connections, but yet still, a 5G connection.
Okay.
Right. And this is actually by design and a good thing to some degree. I like to think of the spectrum as kind of a wedding cake model, right? The base layer, not very high, but it goes, in a large diameter from these microsites. And by the time you work up to higher frequencies, you get higher speed, but shorter distance until that millimeter wave in the middle is very high, but very narrow distance. So if you were building a network and you wanted a car to be going down the freeway at 75 miles per hour, you don't want to have to do a cell site transition, handoff every 3 or 4 seconds because you line the highway with the small cells. Oh, there's a change. Oh, so you're going to build macro sites to cover cars because these kind of applications you want to be running while your kids are in the back seat watching a movie in your car is far different than the applications you want to run when you're fairly stable or moving quite slow in an urban area or in a venue of some kind where you're trying to literally get 400 or 500 megabits per second maybe to an application. So the experience of 5G will ebb and flow across these spectrums and different networks within the network, even though the spectrum changes as you move around.
All right, good point, Alan. Thank you. The next question, I think you guys have touched on it just a little bit. Something I've been asked a number of times. Do all of this network of these towers, whether they're small cells, macro sites, micro sites, do they talk to each other wirelessly, or do they need something else like fiber to connect them all up, or is it a combination of both? How does that work?
For the largest part, the only way that the scale of bandwidth that we're talking, you might be able to get an edge cell site or a small collection out on the far edges of a service area, on wireless connectivity back. But for the greatest majority of these, macro, micro, and small cells, the connectivity is going to have to be fiber optics. It is truly, the only medium that can handle the amassing data load that as you transgress one cell tower or radio to another in aggregation, and the amount of bandwidth that each one of those will propagate to the connected users, fiber is really the only way to connect everything back to a true aggregation point in a network of that size and capability.
Okay, great. That's a great point. Thank you, Kent. Okay, well, with that, other thoughts. What does this mean for governments, municipalities that that want to get more broadband deployment into their communities? What does that mean for them? Alan, do you mind taking a crack at that?
Yeah, no, I'll start that off, and actually going to pass it back to you two because you're closer to the municipalities than I am. The municipalities are going to be driven around what can they deploy, or what can they facilitate the deployment of for the citizens of their towns and cities. And much as we've been talking about 5G and mobile services, can't hit it right on the head here, which is this is about the fiber infrastructure and the infrastructure that you put in place behind it, or the zoning rules, the things you put in place ahead to be able to orderly roll out mobile networks and more cells. If one macro site gets turned into 100 small cells, there's some planning activities that need to be done. So it's the fiber infrastructure that you really can't have enough of in place. And often that will be a fiber to the home network put in place, and then reusing that existing fiber infrastructure to put up a mobile infrastructure as well. Beyond that, the sky's the limit for municipalities to be thinking about in terms of cameras, sensors, electric sensors, utility sensors, call boxes, all kinds of opportunities can be thought of for a municipality.
Okay.
Yeah, it's worthwhile mentioning that, many of the municipalities, many of the cities, many, those out there that aim to kind of solve problems, in the broadband marketplace, just like you illustrated earlier, Alan, in that wedding cake design, I mean, you have to build a good solid foundation. And, the foundation that all technology kind of points back to these days is fiber optics. Fiber optics is that future-proofed technology, as we have come to know in the telecom industry, that really has limitless opportunities and scalability to handle not only your wired needs of service deliveries, but as we're talking about 5G here today, supporting all the towers and the dense aggregation of all this data and being able to transport it throughout a city, a county, a state, if you will. To build that base layer foundation, any investment truly needs to be considered on that fiber layer first, and then kind of, adding to that the complements to really create the on and off ramps of that base technology grid, if you will.
Okay, well, that's great. So not only do you need the distribution network, but how do you get it back to a location so that it can connect to the rest of the world? Is can't you being a service operator, service provider, tell me about that. What's important for cities and municipalities, government, counties to know about that?
Well, I mean, obviously the all of this, we talk about aggregation and drawing the data back to centralized locations. And for any good network, as much as you'll have diversified network entry and exit points, suffice to say, it works like a funnel. You're bringing your edge data connections and you're aggregating them back towards core access points. For us in the rural parts of Colorado, we're not afforded a lot of fiber optic highways, if you will, in and out of these types of communities. So you have to leverage those existing highways, if you will, to connect you back to the metropolitan areas or the World Wide Web as a whole. So nothing really changes about that core architecture design, but with 5G, you just have so many more smaller funnels funneling into larger funnels and ultimately onto the superhighways back to the, you know, the World Wide Web access points, if you will.
Okay, so it's important then, what I'm hearing you say, that that those areas get multiple, sometimes they call them middle mile networks, get multiple middle mile networks into your communities and into your counties, so that you can better support all of this and keep it up and working.
Yeah, unfortunately, you know, in this modern world, progress comes with pain, and you know, there's construction everywhere. Nobody wants to be the victim of a single, you know, fiber cut or dig in. You know, and as much as 5G has all this promise of big bandwidth everywhere without having to connect with the wire, ultimately the backhaul support systems will be those fiber systems, and more now than ever, we will need those diversified, you know, fiber routes in and out of every community, you know, throughout the state, throughout the nation.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's almost a misnomer to think of this as a wireless network. It's really a fiber network with a short tail on the end. That is the wireless part. You're building a wireless network that's leveraging a fiber infrastructure. And the point is, use that, I think, for municipalities and government agencies to figure out how to leverage that fiber infrastructure in as many ways as you can. And, you know, John, if you're an electric co-op or an electric utility, you know, how is fiber optic going to be reused for the electric grid or for smart meters, for just about everything a municipality wants to do? Eventually is going to tie back to a communications infrastructure.
Absolutely. That is
So
the way of the
this
future.
is monetize, monetize, monetize. Get everything you can out of that fiber infrastructure that you put in.
Okay.
And you know, I think the word monetize, you know, it's relevant to mention that, you know, as big as the ideas are for 5G and all the hype that we're hearing, you know, there's a massive infrastructure that has to be built here. Everything has a cost component, just as, you know, we still see and feel today in the cellular performance networks in rural Colorado. You know, there's gaps, and those gaps exist because of the economic factors. You know, there's not towers, you know, on top of some mountains, and therefore you lose cell phone service because the economics don't work out for the number of connections that need to you know, a cellular tower in certain locations. It's no different for 5G, and in fact, probably the converse. There's so many micro towers and small towers that will have to be built to truly create this seamless network nationwide, that we're talking many years in ramp time to get this to the full dream that everybody's painting it to be.
All right. Thank you. Well, gentlemen, we're coming up to towards the end of our presentation here. We've got just a little bit of time left. So if you could take about 30, 40 seconds, maybe give me your final parting thoughts and shots on this. Kent, go ahead. Would you lead off with this?
Sure. Yeah. You know, for all the dreams and grand ideas that 5G brings about, you know, it undoubtedly is a pivot point in the industry and brings great ideas and concepts. Equally, you know, don't overlook the, you know, the foundational principles, you know, the fiber optic connection, the network that's going to support and allow for the growth of this great technology. So, you know, that.
Okay. Alan?
Absolutely.
30,
And
40
I think
seconds
it's easy to think of fiber and fiber to the home and 5G is almost adversarial, as a binary choice of one or the other. I'm much more positive on them being complementary services, and much more complementary about really the excitement about 5G driving investment by the mobile operators, even the FCC, to push. It will be called 5G for rural America, but it's fundamentally getting a mobile service out to places that have never had mobile service coverage. It just happens to be 5G for the first time. So we're going to see mobile service in places that it's never been before, just because there is a desire to push 5G out. And I'm happy to ride that coattail and close the coverage gaps.
Thank you, gentlemen. We're at the end of our time. So I'm Jon Saunders. We have Alan and Kent, and we thank you very much for participating here.
Oh, thank you for having us.
Thank you.